The sound should not have been there, not in an empty ravine, not beneath fresh snow, and not beside a stagecoach with 3 bullet holes through the door. Elias Ward followed the bell down the slope. It moved on the harness of a dead mule. Then a child's hand reached from beneath the wreck. "Please," a girl whispered. My mother stopped breathing. Inside the overturned coach, a pregnant woman lay pale and still beneath torn blankets. 4 children were packed around her. Blood had frozen along the broken wall. Beyond the ridge came the rhythm of horses returning. Elias pressed 2 fingers to the woman's throat. Nothing. He shifted his hand. There, a thread of a pulse. "You can hate me tomorrow," he told her. "Tonight, you're going to breathe." The oldest girl looked toward the ridge. They said they were coming back. Elias looked at the woman, the children, and the black medical case strapped behind his saddle. He had not opened it in 4 years. But the riders were getting closer. Montana Territory, January 1881. For 4 winters, Elias had repaired other men's broken things: harness buckles, axle pins, wagon rims, anything made of leather, iron, or wood. People were different. People remembered pain. People asked questions. People died while looking directly at you. Once Elias had been an army surgeon with steady hands. Then fever took his wife and little boy, and every skill he possessed failed to keep them alive. After that, he stopped calling himself a doctor. He became a harness man who left town before anyone learned his name. Now an 11-year-old girl watched him from the wreck. "I'm Clara Vale," she said. "That's Toby. The others are Nell and Jude Harper. Their parents were driving." 2 bodies lay outside, disappearing beneath the snow. And her? Our mother, Nora Vale. Nora's breathing was wet and shallow. Her forehead burned despite the cold. She was perhaps 7 months pregnant. "How many men attacked you?" 5, maybe 6. Mr. Harper fought them. Mama hid us under the seats. "Why are they coming back?" Clara swallowed. "They want a book my father hid." Elias had heard enough. 1 horse could not carry 5 people through that storm. But 2 miles east stood an abandoned telegraph relay house with stone walls and an iron stove. He cut the coach curtains into strips, lashed the broken door across 2 rails, and made a sled. Before leaving, he found the brass harness bell. He handed it to Jude, the silent boy with dried blood on his cheek. "Keep it quiet," Elias said, "until quiet stops helping." Jude closed both hands around it. The storm erased distance. Clara and Nell walked beside the sled. Toby shivered beneath the blankets. Jude never spoke. Nora drifted in and out of consciousness. Once she caught Elias by the wrist. "The book," she whispered. "Don't let Russ take it." "Gideon Rusk?" Clara's face tightened. "My father surveyed farms. He found false land claims. Russ killed him for the proof." Elias knew the name. Russ called himself a cattle buyer. Other men called him a thief only when no one was listening. The relay house appeared at the last moment, a black stone box buried in white. Its chimney leaned. 1 shutter hung loose. The telegraph line sagged between poles coated in ice. But the walls stood. That was enough. Elias carried Nora inside. Clara and Nell dragged the blankets. He broke an old chair for kindling and struck 3 matches before one caught. The children moved toward the fire like plants turning toward sunlight. Warmth revealed the danger the cold had hidden. Nora's pulse raced. Her left lung rattled, and blood marked the inside of her skirt. Her labor had started early. Elias stared at the black case. 4 winters carrying it because abandoning it felt like burying his family again. 4 winters refusing to open it because opening it hurt worse. Clara followed his eyes. "My mother needs what's in there." "You don't know what's in there. Doctors keep tools in black cases. I'm not a doctor. You touched her like one." Elias opened the case. The leather creaked. Inside lay his stethoscope, forceps, needles, catgut, carbolic solution, and the silver thermometer his wife had given him when he opened his first practice. His name was still engraved on the handle. E. Ward, M.D. Clara saw it and said nothing. That mercy hurt more than accusation. Elias listened to Nora's chest and the fast, strong heartbeat inside her belly. Then he began giving orders. "Clara, melt snow. Nell, tear clean cloth. Toby, find anything that burns. What about Jude?" Elias looked at the boy clutching the bell. "He stays beside Nora. If her breathing changes, he rings once." Jude nodded. It was a poor plan. But poor plans had saved more lives than panic ever had. By midnight, the center of the room was almost warm. Frost still covered the corners. The children had no food. Nora's fever climbed. Jude had not rung the bell. He had not spoken either. "What happened to him?" Elias asked Nell. "He stopped talking when Rusk shot our father." Jude was holding his hand. Elias had treated soldiers who lost their voices after battle. "He isn't broken," he said. Nell stared at the fire. Then why can't he talk? Because silence can be the mind's way of surviving what it cannot carry all at once. Don't force him. Give him somewhere safe enough to put the words when they return. Is this place safe? The loose shutter slammed. For tonight, Elias said. It has to be. Nora woke as another contraction tightened across her belly. Where are my children? Here, Clara said, taking her hand. Nora counted every face, then looked at Elias, the harness man. You remember me? My husband bought a trace chain from you last spring. Another contraction hit. Elias counted the interval. Too close. Your labor has started. The baby isn't due until March. Cold, fever, and injury do not care about calendars. Nora studied him. How bad? I don't know. You're a doctor. I was. People keep saying that as if it changes what your hands know. Elias checked her pulse. Your husband's book. What is in it? Original survey numbers. Water boundaries. Names of men who filed claims after settlers died or disappeared. Caleb copied everything. Where did he hide it? I don't know. Rusk thinks I do. Outside, a horse snorted close to the wall. Elias extinguished the lantern. A man called through the storm. Mrs. Vale. Hand over the ledger, and we ride away. Nora's face hardened. You murdered my husband. That was business. Don't make your children part of it. Elias moved beside the shutter with his revolver. He saw the rusted telegraph key on the desk. The line had been abandoned for nearly a year, but abandoned did not always mean dead. He crouched beside Clara. Did your father teach you Morse code? Some. Can you send SOS? Yes. He handed her emery cloth from his tool roll. Clean the contacts. A bullet punched through the wood and buried itself in the far wall. The children flinched. That was the warning the man outside called. Elias answered. You missed a door from 20 feet. The second shot came instantly. Elias fired toward the muzzle flash. A man cried out. Horses moved away, circling the station. He crossed to the telegraph desk. The inside wire had corroded loose. He stripped it, twisted fresh copper around the terminal, and pressed the key. Clara stared. It works, makes noise. That is not the same thing. Can anyone hear us? Only one way to learn. Clara began tapping. SOS Ash Creek Relay Rusk again and again. Shots struck the roofline. Then Nora called Elias's name. Her water had broken. The next hour divided him into pieces. One part listened to Nora's heart. One part counted rifle shots. One part watched the children. And one part stood beside another bed 4 years earlier, begging his wife and son to remain in a world that had already decided otherwise. Nora's labor turned violent. Elias examined her and felt his stomach drop. The baby is breech. Can you fix it? I can try. What do you need? Light, boiled water, clean cloth, and everyone to do exactly what I say. Clara stepped beside him. I can help. You're 11. My father taught me the telegraph. My mother taught me wounds. You need hands. No one in that room was the age life should have allowed them to be. Wash to the elbows, Elias said. Nell kept Toby and Jude behind the stove, telling them a story loud enough to cover Nora's cries. Elias worked to turn the baby. For the first time in 4 years, his mind stopped arguing with his hands. They remembered pressure and angle. They remembered patience. They remembered the difference between fear and danger. Outside, men struck the door with a timber. The bar cracked. Then soot fell from the stovepipe. They're at the chimney, Nell said. Smoke rolled into the room. Elias pointed at the kettle. Pour the water into the stove. The fire will go out. That is the idea. Nell dumped it. Steam exploded up the chimney. Outside, a man screamed as boiling soot blasted into his face. For one breathless moment, the children laughed. Then Nora cried out. Now, Elias said, push. The baby's legs appeared. Elias guided, turned, and waited when every instinct screamed to pull. The shoulders caught. Nora's strength failed. I can't. Yes, you can. I'm tired, I know. Elias, you asked me to stay until you were safe. Her eyes found his. I am still here, he said. So you stay too. Nora drew one broken breath, then another. She pushed. The baby slipped into Elias's hands. Small, blue, silent, the room waited. Elias cleared the mouth, rubbed the tiny back, and listened. A heartbeat. Faint. He breathed into the baby's lungs. Once. Twice. Again. The door bar splintered. A gloved hand reached through the gap. Jude moved before anyone else. The silent boy crossed the room and swung the brass bell with both hands. It struck the intruder's fingers with a metallic crack. Jude rang again and again, not as a warning, as a challenge. Then the baby coughed. Nora sobbed. Clara covered her mouth. Elias wrapped the girl and placed her against Nora's chest. She is fighting. The door broke inward. The first attacker rushed low. Elias struck him with the rifle stock. A second fired from outside and grazed Elias's ribs. Clara raised the revolver, but her hands shook. Nell threw the iron kettle into the man's face. Clara's shot hit the ceiling. The attacker ducked by instinct. Elias swept his legs and crushed his wrist with the rifle. Jude kicked the fallen pistol beneath the cot. Toby dragged the broken door bar across the entrance. For 3 seconds, 5 terrified children became a defensive line. Then a voice outside said, "Enough." A broad man entered with snow on his shoulders and a silver tooth flashing in the dark. Gideon Rusk. A wounded man staggered ahead of him. It was Boone Ketter, the voice from outside. Rusk held him by the collar with a pistol beneath his jaw. Boone's face was gray from blood loss. Rusk looked at the wrecked door, the unconscious men, and the newborn against Nora's chest. "You let a harness repairman turn children against you?" he asked Boone. Boone tried to answer. Rusk fired beside his head. The blast filled the room. Boone collapsed into the snow, clutching his neck. The children screamed. "That," Rusk said calmly, stepping over him, "is what happens when a man becomes inconvenient." Elias saw blood pumping between Boone's fingers. Not the artery. Close, but not the artery. Even while Rusk aimed at Nora, part of Elias was already measuring the wound. That was when he understood. The doctor in him had never disappeared. Grief had only convinced him to look away. 2 wounded men followed. Rusk smiled at Elias. "You have caused me a troublesome evening. You came with 6 men and lost 2 children. Give me the ledger. Nora doesn't have it." Rusk aimed his pistol toward the mother and newborn. Elias lowered his rifle. Rusk looked at the medical case. Elias Ward, Army surgeon. Lost his family, lost his nerve. Repairs leather now because leather does not scream. Every child looked at Elias. Rusk meant the words as a blade. Instead, they cut something loose. The baby was breathing. Jude was standing. Clara remained beside the telegraph key. Nell held the iron kettle. Toby guarded the broken door. His hands had not belonged to death. They had only been waiting for him to use them again. "You're right," Elias said. "I lost my nerve." He stepped forward. "But I found it in this room." Rusk fired. The bullet grazed Elias's shoulder. Elias drove into him before he could fire again. They crashed against the desk. The pistol skidded away. Rusk drew a knife. He slashed Elias's coat, then the skin above his collarbone. Elias trapped the 3rd strike. Rusk was stronger, but Elias knew anatomy. He knew where joints failed, where breath stopped, where leverage mattered more than rage. He turned Rusk's arm and forced him to the floor. One outlaw raised a rifle. Then the telegraph line began singing beneath the wind, and horses broke through the snow. A rifle shot from outside knocked the weapon from the outlaw's hands. "Territorial Marshal!" a voice shouted. "Drop everything that can kill a man!" Lanterns appeared in the storm. 6 riders surrounded the station, followed by ranchers and a telegraph operator from Ash Creek. The message had reached them. Not clearly. The operator later said it arrived as broken letters and repeated strikes. "SOS Ash Creek Rusk." Then one final line, tapped again and again by an 11-year-old girl while bullets broke the walls. Children here, that had been enough. Dawn found the relay house blackened with soot and full of strangers. The marshal's men rebuilt the fire. The wounded were bandaged. A rider left for the town doctor. Elias treated one of Rusk's men first. The man had tried to kill him, but the bullet in his neck had missed the artery. "Why save me?" the outlaw asked. "Because you're alive. You really are a doctor." Elias tied the final knot. "So people keep telling me." The marshal searched Rusk's saddlebags and found forged claim seals, letters from a corrupt land clerk, and a list of settlers marked with dates, but no ledger. Nora remembered Caleb's last words. He said he hid it where the truth could travel farther than a horse. Everyone looked toward the telegraph desk. Beneath the iron base was a hollow cut into the wood. Inside lay an oilskin packet, the field ledger, original claims, water rights, payments, names, enough to break Rusk's operation across 2 territories. The bookmen had killed for it spent the night beneath the hand of a child sending for help. The marshal bound Rusk. Toby caught Elias's coat. "Are you leaving now?" The question frightened Elias more than Rusk's pistol. "I said I would stay until you were safe." "Are we safe?" The marshal held the ledger. Riders guarded the door. A doctor was coming. Elias could say yes. He could ride north and keep his promise exactly as spoken. Nora watched him but did not ask. That made the choice his. Elias looked at the black case, the soot on Clara's hands, the bell in Jude's lap, and the newborn sleeping against Nora's heart. "No," he said, "not yet." Toby leaned against his side as if that settled the matter. Ash Creek had 42 buildings, 1 church, 2 saloons, and an aging physician who had been trying to retire for years, doctor. Amos Bell examined Nora, the baby, and Elias, then declared all three too stubborn to die. The town opened its doors to the children. The ledger brought down a land clerk, 2 assessors, and cattle buyers who had grown rich from stolen farms. Rusk was sent to Fort Benton under federal guard. The trial reached far beyond Ash Creek. Boone survived and testified in exchange for mercy. He named graves, corrupt officials, and families Rusk had erased from county records. For weeks, riders arrived asking whether a father, brother, or son appeared in the ledger. The law could not return the dead, but it gave grief a name, a place, and someone forced to answer for it. The story could have ended there. A criminal captured, a widow saved, a broken doctor reminded that his hands still worked. But rescue is only the door opening. Healing is what people choose after they walk through it. Nora named the baby Mercy. Not because Mercy found us, she said, but because we had to keep giving it to one another. For 6 nights, Mercy's breathing stopped without warning. Each time Elias woke before anyone called him, he lifted the tiny child, warmed her against his chest, rubbed her back, and counted until her lungs remembered their work. On the 7th morning, Nora found him asleep in a chair with Mercy inside his coat and one hand resting over her heartbeat. She covered both of them with a blanket. She did not wake him. Clara followed Elias through the clinic, carrying instruments and asking endless questions. Nell still slept with a knife beneath her pillow. Elias replaced it with a small bell. If you're afraid, ring. You do not have to guard the whole house alone. After a long moment, she put the knife away. Toby recovered fastest. He explored every room, broke a lamp, and asked the marshal more questions than the man could answer. Jude remained silent, but he followed Elias everywhere, still carrying the dented brass bell. One afternoon, Elias sat beside him beneath the telegraph desk. You used the bell when quiet stopped helping, Elias said. You were terrified, and you acted anyway. Jude leaned against his shoulder. No words came. None were required. Caleb Vale's body was found near a survey marker and brought home. At the burial, Elias stood at the back. Nora came to him afterward. You can come closer. I didn't know if I should. You keep waiting for permission to belong. He was your husband. Yes, and I loved him. I am not trying to stand in his place. I would not let you. Her voice softened. But there are places that did not exist before the storm. You are allowed to stand in those. She took his hand. They walked back to town together. Spring came late. Dr. Bell placed Elias's black case on the clinic table. I'm old, Bell said. My eyes are poor, my knees are worse, and half this town pays in eggs. That is not a persuasive offer. You've treated my patients for 3 months. I'm offering you the title. Elias looked out the window. Clara was reading a medical primer. Nell repaired a latch. Toby argued with a deputy. Jude learned letters at the telegraph office. Nora stood with Mercy in her arms. His mare was ready. The north road was open. What if I fail again? Elias asked. You will, Bell said. Every doctor fails. Every parent fails. Every decent man fails someone, despite his best work. Elias turned. Bell tapped the case. You are measuring your whole life against one wound you could not close. You loved your family. You worked. You lost them. Those facts can exist together. The words were cruel. They were also true. What would the title be? Elias asked. Partner, until I can escape. Elias opened the case. All right. That evening, Nora found him in the repaired relay station. The field ledger stood beneath glass. The brass bell hung above the door. One bullet remained in the wall. Dr. Bell says you're staying. For a while. How long is a while? I don't know. That is becoming a habit. I'm trying honesty. Try courage. Nora stepped closer. I do not need a rescuer. I buried a husband I loved. I have children who wake from nightmares and a baby who may need years of care. My life is not a clean beginning. Neither is mine. I'm not asking you to replace what I lost. What are you asking? Whether you want to help build what comes next. Elias had faced battlefields, epidemics, and Gideon Rusk's pistol. Nothing frightened him like a future with his name inside it. Yes, he said. Yes, for a while. He took her hand. No, yes, for what comes next. They did not marry that spring. Healing was work. Nora learned Elias became silent when afraid. Elias learned Nora became furious when anyone hid truth to protect her. Clara studied medicine. Nell learned to sleep without a weapon. Toby learned questions could be asked without punishment. Jude learned letters before he found words. His first word came that autumn. A ranch hand arrived with a crushed foot. The man screamed and tried to pull away while Elias cut off the boot. Jude stood in the corner holding bandages. Then he stepped forward. Stay, he said. The room stopped. Elias did not make the moment larger than the boy could carry. He nodded. That's right, tell him again. Stay. The ranch hand stayed. So did the word. More followed. Slowly, unevenly, but the silence had opened. Elias and Nora married the following winter. Clara stood beside Nora. Nell carried Mercy. Toby lost the rings and found them in his own pocket. Jude rang the brass bell when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife. The whole town laughed. Elias did too. He had forgotten laughter could come without guilt. Years passed. Clara became a doctor. Nell ran the Northern Telegraph line. Toby became a marshal. Jude became a teacher for children who had stopped speaking after loss. He never forced a word. He gave them quiet, paper, patience, and somewhere safe enough to place what had happened. Mercy became a midwife. The clinic sign eventually read, Ward and Vale Family Practice. Every winter the family gathered at the old relay house. They lit the stove, sent one message down the wire, rang the brass bell once, not to remember the men who came to kill them. To remember the moment quiet stopped helping. 24 years after the blizzard, Elias stood beside the same desk while grandchildren filled the room. The bullet remained in the wall. The dent remained in the bell. A child pointed to the ledger beneath glass. Grandpa, is that the book everyone fought over? Yes. Was it worth all that? No book is worth a life, Elias said. But truth can keep other lives from being taken. The child pointed to the bell. Did that save you? That helped. What really saved you? The room grew quiet. Elias looked at Clara, who had held the lamp, at Nell, who had guarded the door, at Toby, who had asked the questions no one else would, at Jude, who had rung the bell, at Mercy, who had taken her first breath while gunfire shook the walls, at Nora, who had asked a broken man for a living promise. Then Elias looked at his hands. Age had bent his fingers. Scars crossed the knuckles. They were no longer steady enough for surgery. But Nora's hand still fit inside them. I thought a doctor's job was to close wounds, he said. For years I believed the wounds I could not close made everything else meaningless. The child frowned. Then how do people heal? Elias looked around the room. At first, someone stops the bleeding. He looked at Clara. Someone holds the light at Nell. Someone guards the door at Toby. Someone asks the question at Jude. Someone waits for the words at Mercy. And sometimes a new life begins where everyone expected death. Finally, he looked at Nora. After that, people heal because someone stays. Outside, snow fell over Ash Creek, soft, quiet, almost kind. Elias Ward had spent 4 winters trying to stitch the past shut. The family in that storm taught him what medicine never had. Some wounds do not close because you forget what was lost. They close because someone stays long enough to help you heal.